remarks, after which he will take questions from those remarks. If time permit, he will, of course, entertain questions outside. Dr. Ransom.
Thank you, Eddie, and good morning again, ladies and gentlemen of the media. The effort on my part and on the part of the People's Progressive Party is to continue the engagement with Guyanese through the media on particularly the actions of the Granger administration, and specifically with the declarations weekly and periodically made after the meetings of the cabinet of Guyana. This essentially ensures the activity would continue, these press conferences with that particular objective in mind, and may very well include hosting by others than myself, but who are equally prepared to comment on government actions in general and specifically respond and critically respond to the declarations made after the regular meetings of cabinet of the Granger administration. This morning, I intend to address one general remark, and this is this issue of disclosures, and then specifically to address three others: Parliament, the Berbice Bridge deal, and ethno-political discrimination. Our time is limited, I must admit, so I would hasten to, in the shortest possible time, deliver my 4 contributions. The general remarks about disclosures. It has become increasingly evident that what is made available to the Guyanese, whether through the media or other sources, is severely limited. And there is a view that this is contrived, and indeed information is purposefully being withheld that can indeed contribute to Guyanese having a better understanding of the intentions of the Granger administration and, of course, the course of important events like the economy as it goes on since the May elections. There is the feeling that specifically disclosures that relate to decisions that are made and are being made, that these disclosures are being withheld. So indeed, things are done, and why they're done, how they're done, what's the reason, the objective, those are often left to the imagination, the vivid imagination of commentators and guineas in general. We would use, for example, decisions that deal with the closure of important projects that had been undertaken and were being undertaken prior to the change in the government. And we recognize that this lack of disclosure is not always a total lack of disclosure, but a deliberate act dealing with the retention and the failure to provide specific information. The specialty hospital closure. Those of us who are familiar, and I presume that the media has been doing the appropriate level of investigative work into this project, this initiative. And in light of what has been done, the decision made, the questions that should voluntarily been asked by the media or others have not been. And maybe that's the reason for what would be the administration's response, likely response to the lack of disclosure. What led to the decision? What would happen, or what is being done with all of the obligations that led to the execution up to the time that the project was dissolved, the project was terminated? These are important questions to help one understand the basis for the decision being made, and importantly, how we're dealing with the consequences, because these all enter into judgments about how sane, how feasible, how well thought out a decision is. I made a point that there's about $4 million US worth of infrastructure, foundation work on which the frame of this hospital would have been established. And ask the question, what happens to that? I can't believe that those who pulled the plug or responsible for making the decision would not have had to entertain that question. But virtual silence has greeted that and similar such questions of similar importance where that particular project is concerned. We have the same thing with the closure of the Regional Health Authority in Region 6, statutory body that the current Minister of Health, I insist autocratically, without any engagement, consultation with the regional authorities, pulled the plug, disbanded the entity, and in essence, failed to disclose in any reasonable way to the residents of Region 6, a regional health authority that's been in place for practically a decade, organizing, executing the health program in Region 6. Why is it being disbanded? What comparably is being put in place to discharge those functions that the Regional Health Authority did? Then we have the OLPF, the one laptop per family. Again, disclosures. So the project has been terminated, the plug has been pulled, But the questions that arise are generally ignored. But what do we do? What is going to be done about, and I ask specifically, we have on order over $8 million worth of devices been tendered for that should be arriving in Guyana soon. We have over 55,000 devices in the hands of Guyanese, and these are electronic devices. The project had a mechanism to provide it. Not have to say this would be perhaps after distribution services where you pull it from. So what would launch on one family in possession of a malfunctioning device? Who would I turn to if there's no OLPF? And what about the thousands of otherwise serviceable awaiting batteries and other parts that all of us buy and replace on our own personal devices when they malfunction? These questions, again, have gone unanswered. And those are just a microcosm. Why did the Minister of Communities or Public Communities, depending which page you read in the official gazette, decide to pull the plugs on the interim management councils that had been appointed under the PPPC regime? It had been done in consonance with all of the requirements and the provisions of the law. But the then minister, the current ministers, decided that I'm going to dissolve all of them, and has started, in the absence of any consultations, any disclosure to the affected people, and some really absurd outcomes, that could have been avoided had disclosures been made about intention and a willingness to engage in consultations captured in the law when an elected council is dissolved and replaced by an appointed council. The minister had those facilities, legal facilities at his beck and call, but no, autocratically decided, I'm just going to dissolve because I am the minister. And it goes on. The reason it is being raised now is because there is a fear, a substantial fear, that this behavior would not only continue, it will worsen. And indeed, there may very well be matters close to the hearts of more Guyanese, matters that are much more important than these that I have mentioned, that would be affected by decision making in the absence of disclosures and consultations by the Granger administration. I'm perplexed, I must admit, and the party equally so, about the virtual silence about an otherwise discerning media, discerning press. Why are these things happening? Would frequently have been a response in time past. Now virtual silence greets these uncomfortable at this stage, but what we consider potential dangerous developments by the Granger administration. Specifically now, Parliament. Formalities have gone in a certain direction that provides some I would say, assurance to onlookers that the 11th Parliament would be constituted as designed. In other words, a governing party, or in this case, a governing coalition, and an opposition implanted and attempting to discharge the constitutional roles of a parliament. Legislation and oversight of the executive. Legislation and oversight of the executive. The party, the People's Progressive Party, takes this opportunity to make the following comments. One, in terms of those constitutional provisions that deal with public expenditure, we remain uncertain. Why? Since the mid-2014 submission of financial papers to the Parliament that could not have been tabled, as you would recall, with prorogation and then the dissolution. Why the constitutional provision that says timely presentation? We've had parliamentary sessions since June the 10th. Many of the submissions of the outgoing administration have properly been resubmitted by the Minister of Finance. The laying of annual reports and the loan agreements. But strange enough, there's been an obvious decision not to address the tabling of financial papers. And this is a bit not only unconstitutional, but it generates certain disquiet because we are aware of claims of considerable expenditure. Money for sugar, money for rice, money for rehabilitation. And we know what the rule is. In the absence of an appropriation act, it's 1/12 of your expenditure, total expenditure of a budget agencies the year before. So where is this money coming from? How is this money? So it is a bit of this disclosure element of which I spoke in general, and specifically dealing with the financial affairs. Undoubtedly, the budget and its presentation may bring some amount of closure to this issue. But this is not what was intended constitutionally. It said timely tabling of expenditure. The constitutional role of Parliament is legislation and oversight of the executive. Our second concern, legislation is being proposed and we are fairly familiar with the majoritarian rule concept and this one-seat majority in Parliament that the ruling coalition has would see such legislation likely becoming the law of the land. But how could a Parliament dedicated to oversight of the executive suddenly morph into becoming part of the executive? And as one peruse some of the legislation and the intention of others, it is quite clear that the Granger administration intends to impose on Parliament the job of an executive Parliament. And so, for instance, what they have done in removing, let us say in the Anti-Money Laundering Act, ministerial responsibility and handing it over to the National Assembly. We have commented on this matter before. How could a National Assembly constitutionally become a part of the executive when we are beholden of separation of power. How could you imagine the logistics of having the National Assembly making an urgent decision that a minister could make in the context of some irregularity in anti-money laundering? And now you have to go to Parliament, you have to summons Parliament, you have to get a debate, and in the meanwhile, all of the timing considerations are lost. So that's another concern that we have. It's replicated in their intended amendments and repeal of the Broadcast Act, where the Parliament suddenly becomes an executive parliament, discharging functions that had been reposed in the minister in the original 2011 legislation enacted by the outgoing People's Progressive Party. We are calling on the media to observe this phenomenon and to ascertain where the hell is it taking us when we end up in a totally anomalous situation where oversight of the executive leads Parliament as a part of the executive now overseeing itself. An extremely awkward situation that is easily avoided by paying attention to what are the rules and practices of parliamentary matters. The People's Progressive Party is, as I said, in dealing with preliminaries, returning to Parliament, has concluded in conjunction with the Parliament, the training of its 10 of the 32 parliamentarians are new. 10 of the 32 are new, and they had the induction exercise yesterday, and the anticipation is the entire slate would be there for the purposes of the budget. The entire slate would be there for the purposes of the budget. This disclosure has been made. I guess we have to call her the Chief Whip elect, because that, of course, has not been as a consequence of a parliamentary hearing of Madam Teixeira. The Chief Whip elect made those disclosures to the Speaker, as well as indicating that there is and will be no doubt that former President Barrett Jagdeo will be the leader of the opposition in the 11th Parliament. The other matter is the Berbice Bridge. Minister Trotman statements highlighted in the press dealt, of course, with fulfilling or the steps being made to fulfill an election campaign pledge of the AFC to have the tolls reduced. But as one becomes familiar with two things, one, the actual structure of this private company and the toll setting mechanism, and two, become familiar with what the administration intends to do, then I think the real headlines ought to be saying we're ready to commence negotiations with the company. And he did admit this, and I think this is commendable. Because out there, I am certain, probably in the hype of the election campaign, it may have been presented not as a negotiating with a private company, but an executive fiat that would be done by the APNU AFC coalition if they got into power. The day after, they would automatically reduce the tolls. We're happy that sanity seems to have prevailed, and indeed the negotiations with the private company, the Berbice Bridge Company Inc. We are told these negotiations have started, an endpoint we are told actually has been identified, and how is it that the administration would engage in a successful activity with the company to lower the tolls. The minister easily recognizes that the private company, if you're going to take away my property, which is tolls, you better start thinking about compensating me. It's a legal position. So already thrown into the entire potpourri of all of the discussions is subsidies. Subsidies that taxpayers would have to meet to enable the tolls to be lowered for the benefit of a segment of the Guyanese population. That's the Berbice Bridge. Ethno-political discrimination. The Anti-Discrimination Committee of Freedom Radio, FM 91.1, has waxed on this matter over the last months incessantly. The fate of government employees who have been, either because of their ethnicity or because of their political affiliation, been the subject of Granger-led administration discriminatory practice continues, and it is worsened. All sorts of guises are being used. Well, you have 100 days leave, so you better go for leave. Although I'm pretty certain if we went through the entire public service and made a commitment to send everybody on leave who got 100 days, we got a whole lot more people to go on leave. A whole lot more. And if we were going to use political affiliations, well, at least 20 ministers who were serving members of the government service in the PPP civic administration, by their logic, ought not to be there. Minister Cummins, Minister, what's his name, George Norton, ought not to be there. So we are pointing out this political, and we are concentrating on the ethnic. We have made this point that black members of the People's Progressive Party supporters are unusually exposed and treated to the rampant discrimination of this Granger administration. It's historical. In the olden days as the PNC, it happened. It happened. And in the more modern days, under the renamed APNO and the coalition, it continues. Our black members of the People's Progressive Party, civic, who are employed, working in the government service, are unusually targeted by this administration. Again, we are saying these facts have been drawn to the attention of the administration and particular ministers in the administration, the silence is deafening. And we continue to observe the contagion of silence that has extended it into civil society. A civil society that heretofore has been an ardent defender of doing right and prescribing doing wrong. For some strange reason, have lost their way, and by their silence seem to be condoning or even being a part of this travesty being visited on Guyanese. Members of the media, those are the comments. I am a bit sorry I extended my contributions longer than I intended to, and I do promise I will make appropriate corrections in the future. But I would like to entertain questions. The time limits that remain to those considerations I brought to your attention this morning. Thank you.
Honorable Jones from MTV, you spoke of the specialty hospital and the fact that money would have been expended on the foundation already. Since the new government has taken over, checks have been done at various regional health facilities and clinics, and it has been unearthed that they're not in the best of conditions. Could you say whether the previous government would have considered rectifying the problems in those facilities before investing in a new facility as a specialty hospital?
Well, you know, I think that one cannot lose sight. In every budget, at every level of government, funding is made available for maintenance. Every level. But we mustn't confuse funding for maintenance, which is on the current side, with these capital expenditure projects. They're two different things, totally different. And so the repairs and the rehabilitation of facilities, not only in health, in any other area, roads, education facilities, maintenance costs on the current side, we shouldn't confuse that with investments, capital investments into the new acquisition of new assets to serve additional purposes that became the subject of study and conviction that they need to be addressed. I spoke on this matter and I told you about this almost the scourge internationally of chronic non-communicable diseases that is affecting the third world, perhaps to the same or even a greater extent than the developed world. These considerations lead inexorably to tertiary care. We ain't going to get by providing primary care and dismissing from our minds that cancer and heart problem and strokes and kidney problems occur and need to be attended to for comprehensively dealing with the health of societies. So we look after maintenance, but we also have to invest in tertiary care.
Sir, but just a quick follow-up. You spoke of maintenance. If I could highlight a specific area. At the Surrey Hospital, a new theatre was built for the facility. The theatre, since its construction has never been used, the walls are falling out. The nurses are complaining about being electrocuted if they touch the walls. And there has been no attempt by the previous government to recoup any kind of funds from the contractor. I think it's Arvasu. You know, and this would have been an investment, I would think, and not maintenance into a new part of the study facility.
I don't think that you understand the separation between maintenance and capital goods. That theater has been built, it is unserviceable, it has to be repaired. That is quite different from a capital expenditure in creating a new and novel entity, a specialty hospital.
I think what he's saying, sir, is you're building new things and you can't even maintain what you have in hand. That is part, sir. We're dealing with the ethno-political discrimination. Yes, sir. Sir, you say this is something new. The government says it's merely dealing with those public servants who adopted the role of politicians, and this is being done as a part of the measures to sanitize the public service, which is something that the PPP did when it came into office, and you and I know that. Why is it so strange now, sir?
I don't like this assertion that you and I, because your recollection differs from mine considerably. But this opportunity is not being used to revisit the past. I want to believe you're a good Christian, and when the good Lord sent his son here, elements of the Old Testament, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, we disposed of. We said, we got a new way of doing things.
There was a May 11th.
23 years later, if you're going to insulate our political evolution in what happened 23 years, heaven helps me. This celebration, 50 years next year, would probably similarly be insulated in what happened 50 years ago. We're in for tough times. I'm just making the observation about tolerance in employment. That is a fact. That is a fact. I sat as the chairman of NIS, and they had NIS officers, government, we could call it, although I don't accept this notion that NIS is a government and has public funding, but let us accept though that NIS employees ended up in Parliament in the opposition. Let us accept as a fact that this occurred on both sides, whether it was government, whether it was opposition, but that is why the term tolerance is used by us. But it is morphing now into intolerance. That's the point I'm making. And so the fact that 23 years ago this would have happened, I don't think you really understand what you're saying. You might be saying that the generals in the Latin America and their behavior might be justified today because 23 years or less ago, that's what was par for the course. And I'm certain that you're not going to say that.
Gordon Mosley, your source. But Dr. Luncheon, sir, could you be more specific with regards to these members of the past administration who might have found themselves as part of this political cleansing of sorts?
I will share with you, Brother Mosley.
Is that a promotion?
I will share with you the correspondence that I sent to Minister in the office of what they call it, the minister in the Ministry of the Presidency. I'll share that with you.
Okay, and sir, as a way that the party will be going to Parliament in time for the budget, the PPP, as you would have indicated. Just yesterday, one of your former government ministers found herself facing serious charges, and already she's a part of another probe at her former ministry. Could you say if the party is still sticking to her side in taking her to Parliament, and do you think that is something your supporters would support?
Well, Gordon, I presume that you, as I am, are beholden to the notion of innocence until proven guilty. I am correct, or am I not?
Yes.
Good. Well, I think that answers your question.
No, but sir,
But you want to deal with perceptions now.
yeah, perceptions, how it
Okay.
comes across. Because the complaint was made by a former member or a member of the PPP too, Mr. Haider Ali, who was the permanent secretary. He was the person who brought this to the attention. We've all seen the documents and so. And the party, Mr. Rohi said a few weeks ago that the party got involved, called her in, and then these vehicles started rolling back in just after that meeting. So what do you think with that perception out there, the party ought to be a bit more careful in terms of who it's taking to Parliament to represent its interest.
Well, I'm always happy, you know, when I saw the protesters outside. I said, with friends like these, who needs enemies? You know, I really enjoy knowing that there are people out there who care so much about the party that it is a bit offended when the party seems to be making decisions that are uniquely party. But I'll start out from you're innocent until proven guilty. I will concede that perceptions are important. In the politics, they say perception is politics, no? And I think you should await. Speak not as though a decision has been made.
The decision with regard to.
Am I conveying the right understanding?
I'm trying to get a clear
You're
understanding.
trying to get.
Is the
I'm
party
saying
now
to you,
reassessing?
I'm saying to you, do not behave as though a decision has been made. Is that
Okay.
more of an understandable position?
So it's in the air for return to Parliament? Is that a fair assessment?
But I don't know which ear you're talking about. If it is the ear in here, I will tell you we have not made a decision.
On whether she
If
returns to
this
Parliament?
is in the ear in here.
Okay.
This other ear that you're talking about.
So is it fair
and
then
this
just-
one here?
In fairness, sir, could we then say that the party is still to decide on her presence in the National Assembly when you return in time for the budget in a few weeks?
And there is,
What
sir.
what we are deciding is the extent to which these perceptions of which you speak, and I concede exist, would influence the decisions of the executive and the leadership of the party.
But it's accepted Berry runs right quickly, sir,
Just-
because
just hold on,
if
hold
he's
on.
convicted, then he shouldn't be a member of Parliament, and he was tried this
I
morning.
think you need to go back to the constitutional
Is
provisions
convicted.
and examine that. But as I said to you, the perceptions indeed are real, and indeed it has contributed to look by the party, how do you deal or how do we intend to deal with such perceptions?
It's a spin-off from both questions. One, you've identified Mr. Chair as Chief Whip.
Elect.
Elect.
You could always refuse.
Jack Vio as the opposition leader. Could you say if the party has identified a deputy speaker? And also, if I'm to look at it in the broader sense, we have three of the persons who are going back to Parliament with matters before the court, and we've also seen the protests against Mr. Nandlal and other members. Could you say if the party is going to make any changes at all to the current parliamentary list that is before the Assembly?
But I don't know, Gordon. You think you could answer it for me, having listened to what I said? Your first question, though, that asks, what was it? What was the first question?
Deputy Speaker.
The deputy speaker. I think you got to credit the I'm getting confused now. I going to say credit the HPS, but you know, we let it slide. You need to credit the. What am I now?
Roger.
Yes, you got to credit Roger now with some intelligence. If I said to you, the leader of the opposition, and I said to you, the chief whip, I may say nothing more. There must be a reason why I ain't saying nothing more. You think I just forget it, or I'm addicted to the non-disclosure of the Granger administration? No, I'm glad. No, I'm not. We haven't decided.
Any other questions?
With regard to Berbice Bridge, sir, you said that it's
Commendable.
commendable that the government has admitted it has to now consult
Yeah.
with this private
negotiate.
company. But while in government, you would have heard the cries of the people in the Berbice region about the expense of that bridge. So is this a path that your government, your former government might have taken had it been re-elected, to look at this issue and how you can reduce it? And do you think it's a good move generally?
We have been, and I think the records would show, both in the 10th Parliament and outside of the 10th Parliament during the campaign, taking pains to explain what the government position was, because this was historical. It's a private company. That was the first thing, and we did not want to concede that that administration was into nationalization and to take away unilaterally the property, private property. And that started as our back against the wall position. Our second position dealt with this notion that these tolls were usurious. It is someone out there has convinced the average commuter that compared to what was being paid before crossing by the ferry, that these tolls were indeed usurious. Well, we went on the TV, we went in Parliament, we went in the bottom houses and in the forum in Region 6 with elaborate graph and documentation to show that this was indeed not so. It's not only the comparison of the tolls, but it's the facility that the bridge offers. Most of us drive, most of us are old enough to have used the ferry, transport and harbor, and most of us, I would say, we have rather indelicate opinions about the service that was then rendered. Nothing like what is happening today. Surely you pay a price for that too. When you put all of that together, I think the move to consultation and negotiation with the company makes sense. You got, it would be extremely difficult to do as what the APNU and the AFC sought to manipulate public opinion. By when we take over, we can change them tomorrow. I think, as I said in my opening statement, sanity has prevailed, and some people obviously talk this thing over and say, yeah, you better do this thing the right way before you open up a can of worms with investors and confidence in investors, with constitutional provisions that protect private property. Them kind of thing you don't mess with, Chief. For lower the tolls. You might do that for revolution, but for lower the tolls, you don't mess with them kind of things.
And sir, just, I don't know if that's
Yes, sir. Sir, you are concerned that some of the things that were once vested in the ministers are now vested in Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
The government reason is that by removing the authority from the minister, what you're actually doing is removing the authority from political hands, because the minister is a political animal, and you're putting it in the Parliament, which is in the hands of the people. Do you support that argument?
No, obviously not. I don't think it's not Luncheon supporting the argument. If there was an argument that was sustainable, that had merit, then you wouldn't have had separation of power between the Parliament and the executive that saw Parliament overseeing the executive, because it don't make sense overseeing itself. That's the bottom line. At the end of the day, when something occurs in the broadcasting sphere, and let's assume this madness that the government is proposing becomes enacted because of their one-seat majority. Here comes the committee dealing with oversight. And the committee got to say, hold on a moment, Barnes, you better go on the other side over there, because you can't sit down with we here. Even though you're a member of Parliament, but because you are also the one vested with the responsibility, you better go over there. You can't be part of us. It's not feasible. It's not consistent with separation of power. That's what we are insisting. If there is a different model, particularly if you consider what you're saying, if minister is political and it needs to be avoided, we better close down the ministerial approach to government. You know who you're going to put the Parliament for run government, because you can't pick and choose. You can't say in broadcasting the minister is political, therefore we got to stop and put Parliament, and then in the other area they're going to say the minister is political but we got left it. It is very inconsistent.
Mr. Luncheon, sir, wanted to pick your brain with regard to the Venezuelan issue. I know,
Gordon, I think you might have missed number one, time has elapsed.
time gone?
Yes.
But what you've been there
And
forever
two,
in
and two,
politics.
that I did see that I would want to confine my remarks, questions to my opening statement.
Nothing on Venezuela at all.
I will want to invite you to a discourse that we're planning on this Venezuelan issue. I'll keep you informed about date, time, and place.
Okay, the documents you to send to me too, as a brother.
Yes, yes, brother.
Ladies
Okay.
and gentlemen of the media, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for coming.
Thank you.